My goodness, it's wonderful to look out on this room and see a lot of friends. For those of you who don't know me, which is maybe some of you, I think I know about half the room, don't know the other half. I'm Carol Sargent, and I'm the director of the Office of Scholarly Publications at Georgetown. And that office began 8 years ago. I was a faculty member in the English department, and people would ask me about publishing, and I sort of thought we ought to have an office that could focus on that. And it started out as an office really to focus on university press books. The original vision was university press books. But then, because I thought high-impact articles, journal articles, would take care of themselves, right? But it actually turns out that industry was changing quite a bit too, and faculty were surprised how strategic you could be about high-impact articles, that in fact there was a lot of strategy involved, and the editors at journals were also happy to discuss ways in which those could be more successful. So now I'd say actually journal articles, maybe even edge books, just slightly, but we do about half and half. And the Scholarly Communications Committee has been a wonderful partner, and Meg Oakley and I, along with Richard Brown, who's the director of Georgetown University Press, who's here with us today, we've all had a chance on that committee to think creatively about programs and content that might merge what the library does even more than it already is a powerful research partner, but might merge the library even more as a research partner. And so this event today grows out of that. And before I introduce Kate Marshall to you, what I'd like to do is also get you thinking about the questions that you're going to ask her. Because I'd like you to think about a succinct question. A question that you can ask sort of kind of to the point that has an opinion in it a little bit, a little bit of something that she can render an opinion on. And when you do, I'd like you to identify yourself. Please stand up, please say your name, please say your department. It's a wonderful way for a lot of us here to get a sense of who's in the room. And it's also a good way, this is being recorded, and it's a good way for us to kind of save this information. So maybe, I think thinking about that for just a minute. And also before I introduce Kate, I'll introduce my colleague Richard Brown. Richard has taught me a lot about university press publishing, and he's also really turned Georgetown University Press into a great rarity in scholarly publishing these days, which is a press that sticks to its mission and still manages to be fiscally solvent and also keep its principles. Doesn't say, hey, we're going to go try to be, just maybe a diluted trade press, but no, we're actually going to be a very, very, very relevant scholarly press. So I admire that. And Richard is also here to answer your questions. Kate Marshall will be giving you her take. Sometimes editors agree, sometimes they disagree. It's always more fun when they actually see things differently. Sometimes they'll just give you two different angles possibly on the same idea. So I'm going to welcome him to chime in as well. I hope that I can adapt that old Jesuit saying, and they say it maybe too much on campus, when you've met one Jesuit, you've met one Jesuit. I think that that's a real, you can move that into the university press world and say when you've met one editor, you've certainly met one editor. I even have had editors down the hall from each other who don't agree with each other. And then I had their director telling me that she or he spoke for the press. And I go, do you guys even know each other? Would you like me to make introductions? So given that, it was really helpful to get to know editors as people and to talk to them directly about what they see and what they think and what they acquire. Acquisitions editors can do what I can never do for you, and that is offer you a contract. And so I think it's really intriguing to get their take on it in that way. Kate Marshall is an acquisitions editor, and she studied history at Bates College in Maine. Her master's degree is in Latin American Studies at UC Berkeley, and I think that's really interesting too, because a lot of editors in these different fields are not in any way peers for the lists that they acquire. Now, a peer can mean a number of things, and sometimes it also means a PhD, but I certainly think advanced studies in the field in Latin American history when you acquire it is extraordinarily helpful and very, very promising for the relationships. She joined UC Press in 2008, so she's been at this a while. That's another thing. Editors who have experience and who maybe are likely to stay with the press. We do have issues about editors moving even while the project is underway. Orphaned books, we don't want that. She's got some exciting new work, and she'll tell you about it more. But she does have a list. The first books are going to be coming out in Latin American history. She's developing a textbook program. And there's a talk of interdisciplinarity all across academia right now, and that's a really hard thing to live. It's an easy thing to talk about, and a very hard thing to actually pull off with any sort of intellectual consistency. And so I think it's going to be really exciting to see some of the ways in which they do this, I think, much more thoughtfully than most. Areas of acquisition include food studies and environmental justice issues and environmental history, I believe. So with that said, I do welcome Kate Marshall. She's going to speak for, really as long as you want, but I'm saying about 15, 20 minutes because we want to leave a lot of time for the Q&A because I think that's where the real rich meat is in these events. So Kate Marshall, welcome.
Carol, thanks everyone for having me. It's, the editors at UC Press make a concerted effort to spend time on campuses, and I'm actually a Washingtonian, so this was, I grew up in Tacoma Park, so it's nice to be here. Hi, how are you? I was on campus last year, and Carol invited me to come back and speak to a larger group, which was nice. So I thought I'd just talk a little bit about what I do at UC Press, and I was going to ask how many librarians are here. Okay, if you want to talk about open access and the Luminos program, which we can leave time for that, but it's something that a lot of librarians have been asking UC Press editors about, but I can do that for the Q&A. So at UC Press, I'm primarily a history editor. I am one of 2 history editors at the press. We have another editor who acquires American history, world history, and Middle Eastern studies. I've been expanding our history program to, as Carol mentioned, grow into Latin American history. I also do environmental history, and I manage 2 interdisciplinary lists that have nice rooted books in history. So those are food studies and Latin American studies. The history list is mainly a mix of monographs, but also trade books that, are books that are the kind of trade book that are might get reviewed in the New York Review of Books or NIRA, London Review of Books, but are probably not mass market trade books. That's just something. And then the monographs are books our bread and butter are books that get used in classroom teaching, books that end up not anchoring a class but being taught, as you all know, in over 1 week or something like that. So. But history, even though that's my background, my academic background is relatively new to me as a publishing area. And in the last year, I've been really focused on working to develop a text program. As markets have changed, we've been talking more about how fewer and fewer scholars at certain types of institutions, probably not at Georgetown, but at big universities, aren't able to teach monographs anymore and don't have material that they need for the classroom. So I'm not talking about big, giant commercial publishing house textbooks. I'm talking about books that synthesize core concepts or ideas for upper division classes. So that's something that is totally new to me that I'm working on. We've been playing around with some ideas for series that I'm happy to talk about and get feedback on if you guys have ideas. One is to do a series of little books on pivotal places in world history. Another one is called How X Explains Y. So to take your favorite teaching topic and put it in a broader context. So that's, this is not, I don't have examples of those books to share with you. These are the kinds of things that acquisitions editors do in terms of developing new ideas and launching new lists. So it's just something I'm working on. For a longer period of time, I've been the food studies editor. Food studies is an interdisciplinary field of inquiry, and our UC Press backlist is primarily history, anthropology, environmental studies. We have some politics, health, nutrition, journalism. I have authors who are chefs. I publish cookbooks. It's an incredibly fun list. UC Press has one of the best food studies lists. We were the first university press to start publishing in the field. When I started at the press, most of the books were all food and culture because that was sort of the beat of this field. And everyone who did food studies was very defensive about how food was maligned. Nobody cared about food studies. And that's no longer the conversation that's happening. I think food studies has been around long enough that people are not defensive about their work, and increasingly food studies scholars are trying to contend with social justice and environmental justice issues. And so it's a collection of books that is wonderful to develop and work on because, particularly as younger generation students are really, really engaged with talking about food. It's like a catalyzing political issue for them. So I've worked hard to develop books and materials that speak that can be work really well in the classroom. The other thing that's really fun about working on food is it's just in the popular zeitgeist. So even my most scholarly monographs get a lot of pickup in terms of reviews. So I've had, like a great example is I published this wonderful book on the history of ramen a couple of years ago, but it's definitely a scholarly monograph. It was a revised dissertation. And Men's Journal reviewed it, of all places. But which is just, it was not. I've never had a review in Men's Journal. It'll probably never happen again. But it was, it was a fun sort of way where our list is kind of out there. Mark Bittman's a great fan of UC Press's food list, and he often reviews or mentions my books in his columns. So, which is really rewarding to sort of see the actual impact of what I'm working in broader conversations, even if the market for the book itself is sometimes limited. So, so that's food studies. And as I said before, I wanted to talk a little bit about how, when I started, the list was all focused on food and culture. It was launched by my predecessor, Sheila Levine, and in concert working with Dara Goldstein, who created the journal Gastronomica, which UC Press publishes. And one of the things that you'll find about acquisitions editors is every editor has their own take on a particular list. I was really fortunate to sort of take on this prestigious, well-respected, high-profile list when I became an editor, but I definitely have made it my own. And it's taken time because of the cycle of publishing a book, but I'm very committed to publishing on social justice and the environment, so the books that are coming out in the list now are a little bit less focused on culture and more focused on some of these conversations that I think are very key to how food is being taught today, but also how people are discussing food. So some examples, I'm doing a book about, fun topic. So Sarah Bowen is a sociologist who's writing this wonderful book about how DO labeling, so terroir, the concept of terroir is playing out in Mexico in mezcal and tequila industries. Another book I did recently that won the Food Studies Prize from the Association for the Study of Food Societies is Margaret Gray's Labor and the Locavore, which is challenging, it's really promoting the idea that foodies need to think about labor when they talk about a comprehensive food ethic, that it's not all about pesticides. And that's an example of a book that was a revised dissertation. It's very scholarly, but the author got reviewed in dissent. The author was in the New York Times, so she was all over public radio and really promoting her platform and her message. I was really proud of that one. So some other books I have coming out on food is I'm doing a book with a young scholar named Megan Kearney that's called The Unending Hunger. That's about issues of hunger across the border. So how Mexican migrants leave Mexico because of issues related to access to food, only to find themselves in food deserts when they get to the United States and contending with different sorts of health issues. So these are the kinds of food books that I've been looking for. Last year we published Rachel Loudon's Cuisine Empire that made a big splash. That's a big world history book that's being read, definitely outside of food studies, but anyway. So that's the food list. I was talking before about Latin American history, but when I became a full-time editor, we were looking for various ways that I could grow a certain list that we already had at UC Press, and one of the things I said was like, we really, really should be in Latin American history. It does not make sense, and I see some head nods because UC Press used to publish Latin American history. Then the Latin American Studies list was managed by my brilliant colleague, Naomi Schneider, who's the Soc editor, and the list became all focused on sociology and anthropology. And we publish absolutely some of the very best books on Latin America in these fields. Really outstanding people like Nancy Shepherd Hughes and really well known. But we dropped off the map in Latin American history and let other presses completely sort of fill the gap. So Duke emerged as the leading place to publish, and people published with Texas, Cambridge. And I made the case that I thought there was space to be back in the game. And also, I happened to know through insider knowledge that there were a lot of retirements among Latin American history editors, so I thought it was a moment where I could actually carve out a unique market space. And the reception has been wonderful. So my first books in that list will be coming out this year. I'm still very committed to publishing on publishing the best in anthropology and sociology and contributing to those strong lists. For Latin Americanists, I have been picking up books in geography as well. The one area in which I don't really do any work is literature, because the press has decided to stop publishing in literature, so with the exception of Mark Twain. So yeah, and I'd say, you know, part of the work of launching a new list and rejiggering the list so that it fits your interests is kind of developing a set of areas that you're interested in focusing on. And you know, as I said before, I'm very interested in social environmental issues. I'm also super interested in urban Latin America. So I have a new book with Arlene Davila coming out on the phenomena of urban shopping malls in Latin America. This would be a really fun book. She's a beloved, scholar, anthropologist. Another example is in the fall I'm publishing this book with Jason De Leon at University of Michigan that is about migrants dying when they cross through the desert. It's called The Land of Open Graves, and it's this wonderful, brilliant book that I can talk more about later. But so there, you know, it's not all history. I'm definitely trying to speak, and I'm trying to build connections between scholars across fields. It's very important to me that my authors see me not just at the history conference, but at AAA, at sociology, and at LASA, and know that I'm talking to different fields. So yeah, so those are the areas that I publish in. I'm trying to think of, you know, one of the questions that Carol wanted me to sort of address was, what are things that I wish people understood about my list or being an editor that they may not. And you know, I think there are a million ways to sort of answer that question. If I were sitting in a room that was mainly graduate students, I would say, your dissertation is not a book, so don't pitch me your dissertation as a book. But I think that's not the majority of people who are sitting here. You know, I think the single most important thing, particularly at a later moment in your career where you're thinking about speaking to broader audiences, is I wish people would invest energy in thinking about what is their platform and who they're trying to speak to and who their audience is. And it's perfectly fine if your audience, if you're maintaining an audience that is scholarly or student-based and it's a community that you've been writing to already, but if you really, when we just had this conversation at lunch, if you want to expand that audience and speak to a broader public, I really want to know, and when we initiate that conversation, how exactly you plan to achieve that or what you're doing in order to reach that broader audience. And because that really helps me figure out how to place your book and how to market it, or I should say pitch it to my colleagues in marketing, who are the people who are actually going to go out there and sell your book and work with you. And often our most successful books are the authors who work really collaboratively with our marketing team. Classic example, star author, Marian Nestle. We published Food Politics with her a million years ago, tremendously influential book. Marian works wonderfully with UC Press. We tag team. We're promoting her in social media all the time. She's out there in the universe giving lectures and talking. We make sure the books are at her events. So it's really working together. Yeah, so I want to make sure there's a lot of time for Q&A because I feel like it's much more useful. But so I don't know if I should stop and let you talk for a bit, or.
You did great.
Okay, and then I always find that there are more questions than there are.
Yeah. So please go ahead and stand up and ask questions.
Oh, okay.
And if you want to identify yourself, that would really help us a lot.
It's helpful for me to know, like, what kinds of information or advice do you need? Not just even direct questions, like what are the things that you want to talk about with regard to scholarly publishing? And, I will do my best not to speak about industry issues, but to just talk about my experience in California.
I'm happy to start. My name is Michael. I'm a professor. I'm an adjunct professor here last 5 years. I actually teach at 5 schools now. So it's a pain in the ass. Anyway, so what I was curious about is what people should consider when judging different publishers, right? So that's the big thing. So I'm a doctoral candidate. I'm defending in a couple weeks. I've been approached by 2 publishers who saw me present at conferences and says, like, you know, we really like your work. One said, we love your work, but we'd like it to be a bit more focused on anthropology. It's fine. One approached me and said, we love your work, we want it more embedded in a sociology literature. What I'm looking for is to present it as it is. It's an interdisciplinary study of political theory and social movements. So my question is A, how, when we have people, especially early career academics, how do we judge who we should publish with? What are the kind of pros and cons? And two is it realistic to say to publishers, no, like, no, I don't want to refocus this. This is 1,000 pages of my work. I don't want to refocus it. No, it's how it is. Or am I expected to be very malleable depending on their kind of predilections?
That's a great. I haven't been in your position, so I don't know. But I would say so. One thing that I often advise people is to go to your bookshelf and look at your books and see who's published them, and then let go of any of the books that haven't been published in the last 3 years. So you want to look for books that have been published recently. Who's publishing those books? When you go to the anthology meeting, the sociology meeting, who has the table that you are most excited about? Whose scholarship you're citing? You don't want to go delve too deep into the back, because when you think about how long it takes to produce a book, even the new books represent work that was often initiated several years ago. My list, I've been an editor for 5 years, and my list has evolved a lot in that time. And I'm just publishing books that I acquired 4 years ago that don't necessarily even represent my vision for what I'm doing going forward. So I think one of the best things you can do is first take your own temperature in terms of how you're reacting to presses. And then from there, you want to ask your colleagues, who had positive publishing experiences. And I can promise you, not a single person has ever had a 100% perfect publishing experience at any press, whether or not you published at FSG, or I just had a friend who published a book at, with a big trade house and had lots and lots of grievances with the experience. I do think that personal relationships are important, and you want to work with an editor who you trust, because that editor is your advocate at the press. So, I think personal relationships are important that way. You want to pick someone who you think gets your work and can represent you well and responds to email, and will put pressure on their assistant to be due diligent. But the sorts of questions that you might want to ask are about things like the peer review process. You should always ask the publisher how long it takes to publish a book. It's widely variable. When I started at the press, we were sort of an average publisher. It took us about a year to put out a book. Now that number is 7 months, which I can tell you I'm winning a lot of books from the presses that actually take 14 or 15 or 16 months, because 7 months feels really great to a lot of people. So if that's important to you, that's something you want to ask. You want to ask questions about what presses do to market books, and get a temperature. But I'd say the one thing that I wouldn't worry about, unless you're writing a big trade book, is stuff like royalties and getting paid, because it's not a lot of money and it's taxable. So anyway.
Hi, I'm Emily Mendenhall. I'm an assistant professor of global health in the School of Foreign Services. And I am very interested, I'm a medical anthropologist, so I'm very interested in the public anthropology series at California and other presses that my colleagues are publishing with. But I get different perspectives on how to first approach an editor and how far along you should be. So 2 key questions. Number 1, do you want to always go through a colleague? Do you want them to make that introduction? Or should it be at a conference? Or should it be an individual email introducing your work? And the other question is, how far along in a manuscript should you be? Halfway done, completed, before you submit your perspectives?
So, these are good questions, and I don't think there's a right way to go about doing it. I say the best thing is to just email directly an editor, and if you have a person that can introduce you or a connection, you might mention that connection. So-and-so encouraged me to write you, or ask that person if they would drop their editor a line and say, often I'm meeting my authors through my other authors, but sometimes I have to, say, actually this book won't work for my list. So it's not a guarantee anything just because you have an introduction. I think it's really the one sort of thing you risk if you email an editor is they might quickly say no before they've heard from the greater context. If they're like me and they try to just clear their inbox every day, So I sometimes will make very quick decisions. I don't, at the same time, I think the best way to communicate with an editor is directly and just to not, overload people with information initially, but to say, I'm very interested in your list and these books and the series. Do you have time to talk to me? Either at an upcoming conference or make a phone call. I spend a lot of time talking to people on the phone, and I think people don't realize that I'm available to just pick up the phone call and have a conversation for 15 minutes to see if the book aligns with sort of things that I'm working on. I think being polite and not too formal works really well in the state of California. Do you want to chime in?
Go ahead.
Please.
Yeah, right. Just want to mention how important fit is. And I think when you're contacting a press, you want to show that you really know that list. And I think indicating, I've got a project on X. You've published Y and Z and A and B and C in that field in the last year, and here's how I would position my book vis-a-vis those titles. I think that's a really important thing to do because it shows that you know the list and you're not going to be immediately dismissed, hopefully not deleted.
Right.
But sort of putting yourself in the context of that list, I think that's an important thing to do.
Yeah, I mean, it means a lot to me when people write me and say, I have this author, his book is not even out yet, Alejandro Velasco at NYU, who's writing this great book about this neighborhood in Caracas that has been this historic site for, popular politics and urban housing policy. It's just this wonderful book. And Alejandro has just had a really good experience publishing with me and has been telling his friends. And so they write me and they say, Alejandro encouraged me to write you. Maybe I'm a sucker for the flattery, but on some level it makes me feel good that this is about these connections. I should pay attention to this person. They're in my network. So I don't think it hurts. If you're really interested in a particular series, it might be worth first reaching out to the series editor to see if they're interested. If they're not interested, that doesn't preclude you from publishing with the press. I publish on food. Not all of my food books are in the California Studies in Food and Culture. That editor, Dara Goldstein, gets to decide what she will put in the series. But there are books that I've published outside of the series, and that's not a problem. Series are sort of these honorific things. They don't actually, at least in my experience at California, impact the marketing. I'm marketing all of the food books to the food studies community together, not just the titles that are in the series. So, yeah.
Yeah, my name is Alan Bearda. I'm an adjunct professor in the School of Continuing Studies, and I published a book with a larger publisher about 3 years ago on the topic of food, which food studies is my job at Bloomberg. That's what I write about.
Yeah. I looked at your Twitter feed.
Okay. Well, so my questions are, so when I was publishing my book, I was working with an editor, and I was making all the deadlines and doing everything that I thought I was going to. And when I got my manuscript back for the final time, the last 5 chapters did not have a single mark on it, as if it had never even been looked at. And my first question was, do you think they secretly hated my book? My second question is, leading from that, is how extensively would you characterize your author-editor interaction compared with other publishers that you know of?
Okay, well, so just to clarify, you had no marks from the copy editor?
I had a copy editor and I had the editor I've been working with on the book. Neither of them made a mark.
The copy editor, well, then you either write perfectly, which nobody does.
Pick up my book, you'll see I don't.
Okay, so no one should ever have an experience where they're not getting minor changes from a copy editor.
Yeah.
Different presses do different levels of intervention. When in trade publishing, generally it's a pretty high level of copy editing. So I can't even imagine not getting edits.
I actually think I may have gotten like a basic copy edit on a few marks on all of that. The main editor had no suggestions.
Okay, so to clarify for anyone who hasn't gone through this process, so the acquisitions editor, sometimes called the sponsoring editor, is the person who acquires your book. And one thing that I often say to people is you have to understand that your acquisitions editor is not a copy editor, which you obviously get. But their role is like, well, I just read this book called Afterbirth, and the author, Lisa Albert, thanked her editor and called her book doula. And I was like, I love that. Okay, but maybe it's because I live in San Francisco. But it's just like the person who's championing your work. They're essentially your producer. They're responsible for the profit and loss statement. They're your point of contact if there's a problem. They mediate with every single department. They're not necessarily the person that's getting super thick into the text. Now, sometimes there are books that I heavily developmentally edit because either the author is important or the book is, to me, super important and needs work and intervention, and there's something I can add to it. But there are a lot of monographs that I publish where I'm not an expert in the field and the scholar is really renowned and the peer reviewers have done an excellent job. There isn't a lot that I could add. So what I have read is usually the introduction and maybe a chapter at an earlier stage. Sometimes I send feedback on how to articulate a stronger, more forceful argument, how to think about better expressing core ideas. I often advise authors on whether or not I think they're reaching their target audience, but I'm not necessarily going to develop every single book that I work on. There are a few acquisitions editors who have reputations for doing that, but I think they're really in the minority. And I want your opinion on that.
I completely endorse everything you've said.
Okay.
And I think your expectation should be the acquisitions editor is probably not going to get her hands really dirty with the manuscript. I think that's just, acquisitions editors have a very short amount of time to deal with manuscripts, and you probably have, 25 books a year or something you have to acquire, something like that. So, they're sort of pushing them through, and maybe on rare occasions, Kate, you will really get into a manuscript, one that needs it.
Well, so okay, I can tell you an example of a book that I developed that's worth. So I mentioned Jason De Leon. He's this anthropologist at Michigan. He was trained as an archaeologist, and at some point just decided he was not going to revise his 1,000-page Mesoamerican field site dissertation into a book, and was just let it go. And he started writing this field school in Sonora called the, I don't know what the field school is called, but he and his students were collecting objects that they would find in the desert, things that people who were migrating, trying to cross successfully or unsuccessfully, things that they would find in the desert. So it was called the Undocumented Migration Project. It has a great website. It toured as an art exhibit. Backpacks, water bottles, toys, shoes, things like that. And then he was working with his students one day, teaching archaeological methods, and they found a body. And I think it was just this moment in his life that changed the trajectory of his career, and he ended up writing what is, I think, going to be one of the most important books I ever published, but this devastating, devastating book about what is happening, the suffering inflicted upon people who try to cross into the United States through the Sonoran Desert, which is a consequence of U.S. government policy. It's a consequence of prevention through deterrence. So when Jason and I started working together, he's an incredible writer and has this great, he's a National Geographic emerging scholar, so you Google him, he's all over the internet. He's exactly the kind of person. But when we first met, he said, the argument of my book is that you can't understand border crossing unless you use archaeological methods. And I said to him, that's not the argument of your book. That's a statement about how you did your research. The argument of your book is that U.S. border policy has knowingly created a circumstance in which Sonora has become a killing field. That is what you're arguing. That is the purpose of your book. So we worked pretty closely together, editing and sharing material, because ultimately what I was trying to do was elevate his book from an anthropology monograph that would be rigorous and read in anthropology to something that's going to be read more broadly. And in that circumstance, it was really worth my investment because I wanted my marketing colleagues to get behind and push this as a trade book, which we're going to do. But, and then there are other circumstances where I'll develop a monograph because it's a really important author or someone who has just a completely brilliant, original idea but doesn't know how to quite articulate what their, the importance of their work. And so I'll invest some energy in helping them develop their introduction. Does that make sense? So, I mean, I think, and like I said, there are lots of books that really just, there's nothing I could possibly add that will make the book better.
Yeah.
My advice is really about marketing copy, getting the best cover, and making sure they're working really effectively with their copy, with our production team. So,
Yes, my name is Javier Puente.
we've been emailing.
Yes, I was a grad student here, and I'm an assistant professor of the American History at Catholic University of Chile. So I can testify that you are extraordinarily kind in replying to emails coming out of the blue. Thank you so much. I have two questions. Does UC Press have a template for book proposals? And the second question, which was asked before, I don't think it was answered. is how finished does the manuscript
Oh,
need
yeah.
to look?
Yeah, so we do have a template. It's on our website. I think most presses provide information and guidelines. Usually, when you go to a press publishing website, you'll say there'll be a section that says for authors, and it's divided into two categories. One category is prospective authors, and the other category is people who have to do their paperwork. So, and it's like all the dreaded paperwork that you have to download and fill out when you submit your manuscript. So yes, if it's helpful, I can go over what I think makes a good proposal, but that's very easily accessible online. So in terms of the book, it really varies from book to book. So my advice often for people anyone who's revising a dissertation, if you are in a position where your tenure clock is not breathing down your neck, let's say you have a 2-year postdoc or something, and you have a good plan for revising, and you don't need the book contract right then and there for any sort of, a committee who's reviewing your tenure file. I often think it's better to finish the complete revision of the manuscript and then shop it to the press. And the reason I say that is because I'd say the vast majority of peer reviews I get back for first books will often, if you submit just a proposal and a couple of sample chapters, there's a lot of harping on the fact that people will say, this is a dissertation, or this began as a dissertation, this began as, and it's just something that comes up a lot in the peer review process. And you have to go through the peer process a second time when the full manuscript comes in. So if you are close to finishing your full revision, sometimes it's worth waiting until you have the full thing to shop it to editors so that you only have to go through peer review once, presuming that your reviews are positive. So that's an advice I give to people who are at an earlier stage in their career. It's not universally enforced. There are lots of times when I put a first book under contract if it's with just a solid proposal and a couple of sample chapters. But I do think that sometimes what happens in that situation is people tend to relax once they get the book proposal and stop paying attention to deadlines. And there's this false sense of like, oh, the book's in the bag, I got the contract. So anyway, it's just something to think about. It really depends on the individual and your working habits. So I think for scholars who are more established in their career and have already gone through publishing, I require a lot less. But it's really case by case. Sometimes I'm competing for a book, so I'll send something that I'd rather have a full manuscript out for review because I just really want to sign the author. So that varies. What's your take on that?
Yeah, well, if I could add, I've been doing this for 25 years or so, and I have seen a shift over time. Early on, we really wanted full manuscripts. I would say most university presses expected to have close to, if not a complete manuscript. And now it's changed, and things, I think Kate is right, I think it's gotten a lot more competitive, and now we are much more inclined to take a proposal with a chapter or two and send it out for review. And about 65% of what we contract now in the past year has been based on a proposal with a chapter or two. Now, 10, 15 years ago, much smaller percentage. But I think university presses are looking for things, and we're competing with commercial publishers in addition to competing with each other. So I think you've got a better shot now than you ever had of submitting a proposal on some chapters, not the entire manuscript.
Also, if I can just throw in one thing on that, one of the things I do when I visit university presses is I ask editors a lot of these questions, and that's on my standard list of questions. You'll get as many answers as you get editors, because it's very much a working style question too, and very much how much stomach they have for sending it out twice, and also what experiences they've had, because some of them are higher touch, and they've worked with authors very closely, and they've been really comfortable and happy with what they got at the end. Others who communicate differently get a big surprise at the end, and they get something that they can't really work with, and so that was a waste of time and very frustrating for all parties. So I think that you really owe it to yourself to ask a lot of editors, and to realize that the editor you're pitching to at a different press may not have the same set of assumptions and expectations as the editor you were just speaking to. So beware anybody who says what they think, right? That's one of the reasons why we have these dialogues. I will say that I probably hear your opinion from less than half of the editors I speak to, fewer than half the editors I speak to, less than half the editors that I speak to, but not very much less. It's almost just a kind of a 50-50 in that sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think like an example, so for example, I was working with a scholar who was revising his dissertation. He submitted, what he shocked me was 2 chapters and a proposal. It was on a trendy topic. I wanted to publish the book, so I sent it out for review. And then he got the review back, and then a month later sent me the full manuscript. Well, I think that was a waste of his time, not my time.
Yeah.
But he should have just waited. He was so close to being done with the full manuscript. He could have just given me the full manuscript and then gone through peer review once. And what happened was, I went back to the people who reviewed the proposal, and they couldn't take it on again because they had, you know what I mean? So I had to find whole new peer reviewers, and it ended up being a much messier process than it would have been if he had just submitted the full manuscript. But that's what I'm saying, that if you're close, sometimes it's better to just be done.
Did you get a deal?
Yeah, but now I'm waiting for the second,
Yeah.
now I'm waiting for the second review.
Oh, you're
rather
reading
than-
now.
Rather than
Oh,
putting it
gosh.
directly into production, so.
My name is Abraham Sela. I'm a visiting professor at the Department of Government. I was wondering what's your policy on edited volumes?
I have no policy. I don't publish a lot of edited volumes because I probably receive I'd say an average of 2 submissions for edited volumes a week. And I publish maybe 1 or 2 a year. I do edited volumes. I get especially excited about edited volumes if they are synthetic, meaning if the contributors, you have first-rate, excellent contributors, and what they're doing is synthesizing a core concept. I really like edited volumes when they are designed to sort of mirror a course, where each essay might be a unit in a course. Those I feel like have a significant life. The challenge for edited volumes is that I would love to know what Georgetown, but I think when I started working at UC Press as an editorial assistant almost 8 years ago, every book we published sold hundreds of copies to libraries. I mean, it was like 500, 600, 700 copies, depending on the field, would go into academic libraries. Well, that number is 100 now, or 50 to 70 for really narrow fields. So that's a huge problem, and edited volumes almost categorically are in that space of primarily serving the library market. Every once in a while, there's an edited volume that becomes a classic in the classroom because it's on a totally novel topic. So, and that's not to say that we publish lots and lots of books that don't turn a profit, but we don't do a ton of books that have a massive deficit, if that makes sense, even though we are a nonprofit, but it's very hard to justify. We have to be very picky and choosy about them. So, do you do edited volumes?
Less and less, or fewer and fewer.
Yeah,
Yeah.
or less or fewer.
Hi, I'm Glenn Williamson. I'm a visiting professor in the School of Continuing Studies downtown. I teach real estate. I'm also a graduate of Carroll's book lab program here. So my question is on building platform, a topic that's come up before. But how would you advise, I'm working with a group of professors who are teaching ethics, and so from the comment about 2 chapters in a proposal, I was thinking the best thing to do might be to create a really specific real estate ethics book, write 2 essays, and then build some traction with that, and then use that to go and advance a book. Would this be a classroom kind of a book?
Yeah, so classroom books are different because they have a different market. So in that case, what you want to focus on is writing a proposal as opposed to finishing the book that is really, really tailored to showing how your book maps to a curriculum and doing the marketing research to say, this is where this class is taught. It's taught at these, and that's very different than pitching a monograph where your book may or may not be used depending on the subject of a course. And maybe it'll be used in 3 or 4 classroom settings, but there are classrooms that have 10 students. A text for a book that's a major course that's taught at a lot of universities, well, what the onus is on you is do the research and sort of bring that to the editor and say, here's the market. And so in some ways, the platform for a book that's intended for the classroom matters less because we're not talking about building on someone's activist profile. So UC Press publishes a ton of activist scholarship. That's something we're very committed to as a press. It's part of our brand. So we look for, my trade books will be from journalists who write for Mother Jones or editors at Mother Jones. That's the kind of people that I publish. For a text, what I'm looking for is really thoughtful consideration of the pedagogy and the sort of need for the book. And and sort of explaining how there's this hole in the market. So I think in that circumstance, the platform matters less. Yeah, thank you.
Hi, James Vandeveld, School of Foreign Service. I know it's not your field, but I started an anthology on how to defeat radical Islamist radicalization. It had the general support of the university press, but I found half of my contributors never contributed in time, their chapters, so I ended up being sort of half pregnant with the project. What would you advise I do now?
Oh gosh. So do you have the book under contract?
No.
Well, so you threaten to bump people out if they don't submit their chapters to you in a timely manner. I think I have a lot of authors finish their first book, and rather than writing their second book, they're like, oh, I'm going to do an edited volume, and I always say, you need to think carefully about this because they're a ton of work, and you probably now experience that. And part of what the challenge is it's chasing down people who have agreed to participate and are just simply not turning in their material. And sometimes the people you've asked are the superstars that helped you sell the book in the first place, so you really need their participation in order to deliver the book that you promised. I think you do have to honestly threaten people with hard deadlines and say that the reality is the book might have to be dropped. This is one of those reasons why I got into a situation with an author who just absolutely wouldn't turn in a manuscript that UC Press paid a lot of money for many years ago, and I finally said, look, our new director is a businesswoman. We'll cancel your contract and you'll have to repay that advance that you were paid out many, many years ago. And that got her to turn in her manuscript, which was award-winning, has sold astoundingly well. I think it's really different with an edited volume where you haven't paid people, so you can't threaten that sort of economic harm to someone. But I think it is important to sort of make people adhere to real deadlines.
Sure, I'm more interested, maybe there are different types of publication houses now, or online media, things like that I should turn to?
You mean you don't have a book, so you want to consider other publishing
Yes,
options?
what do I do with half a book?
What do you do with half a book? I don't have a real answer for that.
I don't know, but I can say that this is not a pitch for Georgetown. We've done a fair amount in that field, by the way, that you mentioned. But some presses, probably you see, Georgetown among others, are now publishing digital shorts. This is that's white space that's been empty for centuries between a journal article and a full-blown manuscript. And these are texts between 10,000 and 40,000 words. And we launched this a couple of years ago. Columbia, perhaps you see, a handful of university presses and commercial presses have done this. I'm sorry. Palgrave Macmillan with Palgrave Pivot, right. So that's an option to think about. If you don't have a full manuscript, if you've got 25, 30,000 words, something like that, you may want to talk to some publishers. I'd be happy to talk to you about whether or not that might fit into that gap, that digital shorts gap.
Another thing to think about is can any of the essays be augmented to be a book that would be a standalone book, or a standalone digital short, or I think there are ways. That's a really frustrating position to be in, but sometimes it might be releasing people to sort of pitch their work into standard journal format and letting it go, and rethinking about your introduction as a standalone article. So, I don't think we're super far. UC Press has launched this open access monograph program, Luminos, that we're really excited about, and we're not including edited volumes in it currently, but I think in the future there is going to be a place for books with really variable lengths, different sizes, different formats, multimedia, scholars who want to include video or color photographs, people who are doing things that are potentially more experimental than the standard, 80,000 to 100,000 word book. So it's coming, I think. So, sorry for lecturing you about deadlines. Anyway.
Yeah, you mentioned trendy books or current topics that are controversial, hot topics. Race-related would be an example.
Yeah.
Editors say it's the merits. If I don't agree with the thesis, I could still champion this book and sign it because it's.
Yeah.
That's not true, is it?
Okay.
If you don't agree with the book, even if you think it's going to be a huge success, you won't.
You mean if I don't agree with the politics of the book?
Yeah.
I think it depends on the editor. Like, one thing I always say say is that I consider myself, I have a couple of authors who think that, particularly within the food list, that they're in an intellectual war. I have no idea why they think they're in an intellectual war, because I think their books are compatible and offer different provocative takes, but those books both belong on my list because they're contributing to public dialogue and debate about important issues related to the role of food and consumption in society today. So in that sense, I'm agnostic to the politics of those particular authors. With that said, they both are championing relatively progressive ideas that match my politics, but also the press's politics, which is different from house to house. I mean, I definitely think California, we believe that part of what we're doing is promoting progressive ideas, and I think different editors bring different stuff to the table. So with regard to, so it really depends on the individual. So, but we like provocative books, and we always, our most liberal out there editor, we love her. We always do April Fool's Day jokes, and someone created a memo for April Fool's Day that was like, it was like the most conservative pundit you could possibly think of was going to write this like horrible book that didn't mesh with UC Press's values. And Naomi was like all into it because she knew it would sell like tens of thousands of copies. So so I don't know what to say about that. That we made fun of her basically for the next 10 years. So yeah.
My name is Ahmed Ashrati. I'm with the School of Continuing Education. I have a book almost finished. I write about Islam reform, and there's a lot of books written about Islam reform, but they haven't led to anywhere because they are abstract or they focus on the virtue of freedom or gender equality. But those ideas are for the elite, the educated. They never impact the ordinary Muslims. And I thought a good way to achieve some changes to go to the founding mythologies. I went to the story of creation in the Quran, and I rewrote it in a way that's consistent with the Quran. And then I developed a story that could be told to grown-ups, to children. Then I went and wrote about the implication of what we get from that story with respect to ethics, gender, economics, ethnic. I submitted the book, and they've been asking me question whether it's academic or the other category. I don't even know what it is. And I'm I wonder what to make, what way to.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, I can't speak for all presses, but I can say that there are times where university presses, I think there's a moment in time where university presses were trying really aggressively to publish in the trade space, and then after 2008, and amid Amazon's dominance in the marketplace, I think a lot of university presses have started to, California in particular, think about being very particular and careful about trade publishing, so books for general readers, and specifically publishing books where we know what the defined audience is, and it's one that's aligned to our books. And for us, the very best trade books are books that start out speaking to a broad audience, get a lot of reviews and a lot of attention, and then backlist in the classroom, and continue to sell for years and years and years, because much like almost everyone I work with cites Michael Pollan's Omnivore's Dilemma as the book that they're comparing their work to. Now, none of my authors are like Michael Pollan, who has one of the most massive platforms possible in the world of food writing. I mean, he has the New York Times. So, it's not realistic to think that their books will perform like Michael Pollan's book, but what is helpful is to think about how his books are now used in teaching everywhere, and what classes are those and where those books fit. So I think the situation that you're in was that sometimes there is this hybrid academic trade model that is finding to have a smaller and smaller audience as the general book buying public in the United States States is less of a library collecting market than it once was, even 10 years ago. So I think what you have to do is be really specific about who you're speaking to, and is it general? Are you translating the Quran and your ideas for general readers? If so, is the university press the right publisher to sort of get the book out there? I don't know which press you're talking to, but or is this a book that should attract general readers and needs to be in bookstores for a couple of years, but ultimately will be used in teaching? Is another way to think about it. So, but I think that's feedback that a lot of people get, because it's really hard to reach all audiences increasingly.
And just to let you guys know, we're at 3 o'clock, but I do feel there's more possible energy in the Q&A. So we can, if you need to go, because your time, we certainly understand. But if there are more questions, we do have the room until 3:30. So as long as there are questions and as long as you have time, we can just keep doing that until the questions run out.
Yeah, I have a question. My name is Dan Kalfish, and I'm Associate Vice President for IT Infrastructure for the University. That's my day job. By my evening job, I'm teaching a class in the liberal studies. It's about church and science in a historical perspective. And I'm interested because the way that I developed the class, it requires a lot of books for the students, and I would like to publish a textbook together with some reference materials. And I'm not sure, do you publish textbooks or what's the business? Because I'm not so sure how to do a market analysis.
What's the name of the class?
It's Church and Science in a historical perspective. It's the relation between church and science from the 1200s up to present.
Okay.
And it's a change of metaphysics between the two.
So yes, we do.
Well, but the point, that's why I need some help to understand how to position that, because what's different, there are a lot of books and textbooks about science and religion. The difference here is that, because my original background is professor of electrical engineering, I present for non-technical students the concept of relativity, quantum mechanics, and how they come into the modern debate into theistic and non-theistic. So I'm not so sure how much of a market is beyond just the class. How do we go about that?
Do you think it's a class that only you teach? It's completely specific to the
Well,
course that you develop?
no, there are lots of universities who do science and religion classes and history of science. So that would be a more generic approach. But I just have a slant on it, but it would be a generic textbook.
I think for the market research you want to do is to find all of the 15.
Oh, and just quickly, Richard, thank you very much. It was really wonderful having you with us.
Absolutely. See you.
It's to figure out what are those classes, what campus is there, how many students are enrolled in this class.
Oh, so I need to do marketing research myself?
Yeah, I mean, it goes a long way to being able to pitch a textbook. An acquisitions editor who's interested in the project will be able to help you do it, but as much information as you can provide.
Do you cover this kind of textbooks or someone else?
In history, if it's for history.
It is history, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, I will drop an email.
And often my assistant ends up doing the marketing research for a textbook, but it's really important that could we have a syllabus for the class, and how can you make your book work not just for your classroom, but for similar classes that are taught at universities. So you have to.
I will contact you.
I'm Alex Thurston. I'm in the African Studies program. Some of my research involves relatively current events, and I'm getting ready to submit my book manuscript to a press. But at the same time, I get opportunities from time to time to blog or to to write things online. And my instinct has been to hold some of my best ideas and my best material back in those conversations, so as not to give away some of the key things that are in the book. Is that the right instinct, or can there be
What would
a
you be
positive
giving
effect?
away, just out of curiosity?
I mean, so some of my work is on Boko Haram, the violent sect in Nigeria, and so certain kind of arguments and materials about Boko Haram's intellectual genealogy or certain analyses of things that they've done,
Yeah, editors, the flow of information has changed so dramatically in the last 10 years. We used to worry. I remember even 5 or 6 years ago, I was working on a book where the authors were live blogging in a road trip tour they were taking of urban farms, and I realized that many of the chapters of the book were actually very much based on the blog entries, and I completely freaked out. I was like, you have to take the blog entries down, you can't do that, and I don't want to have an unedited version of the book on web. Now I would say, like, it matters so much less now. I mean, as long as the attribution and the credits are right, and there's no issue of copy. You might not want to be, I don't think you would probably be giving anything away if you're being asked to speak. You can say, and one thing you can say is, like, I'm writing a book, and ask whoever is interviewing you to reference this forthcoming book that you're publishing on these issues. Don't name a title, because your title might change, and people get into that all the time. I mean, I think the question is, like, how top secret are the ideas you have? And if they're not, you might as well establish that platform now and tell your book publisher about all of the interviews that you're doing, and how you really want to impress on the publisher that your book speaks to very contemporary issues, that's where you're going to build energy and excitement and attention for your book. There's an environmental historian who I'll see later this week at the Environmental History Conference, who I've been meeting with for years, who's doing a book that's sort of like the history of Firestone in a way, but Ebola has totally changed the way he is thinking about his book, and now he has this very contemporary story to connect this a more historical story, and I think that's great. I mean, God willing, Ebola won't be an issue by the time this book is published, but I think I'm not saying that I wouldn't publish the book otherwise, but I think it's this wonderful angle, and it makes it a lot easier for me to communicate with my marketing colleagues about the relevance of the scholarship if I can speak to how it relates to contemporary issues. So. Yes?
Role of agents. Can you say a few words?
So agents are super important in the universe of trade publishing. I'd say particularly for trade publishers. There are a lot of publishing houses that will not even talk to authors directly, so you absolutely have to have an agent to get your foot in the door.
I should have said for
and
your press
university
and
presses.
university press.
So the distinction is a lot of my authors who have come to me with agents have often bemoaned the fact that their agent didn't successfully market their book and didn't sell it to a trade house in New York, so therefore they're shopping it to university presses, and they're not going to get, they're just giving away 15% of the advance they were going to get anyway from the press. So I feel like I know a lot of authors who've had negative experiences working with agents, once to the point in which they're working with the university press, but it's definitely.
Do you require an agent?
No. And I think it's sometimes a lot easier to work not with an agent, because often agents are trying to mold scholarship into a direction that is not actually scholarly. So, they can be very important advocates for you, particularly in that universe of trade publishing. And it also establishes that, makes it clear to the editor that you think of your book as a trade book, and that's why you sought out an agent. But agents are very focused on the bottom line. So, but they can play an important role in helping you develop and craft the best proposal possible. So, if there's money to be made, it might be worth finding them.
So I'm Kate Dowie. I'm the digital services librarian here, and so that means that, among other things, I manage our institutional repository. So I'll go ahead and ask you about one. Especially now that you do have open access monograph publishing, which is pretty novel in the entire industry, what you kind of wish that authors understood about the decision to become an open access author, and two, some of the things that they might want to consider.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so the Luminous program is our open access digital or open access monograph program. It's specifically for books that are authors who want to be in Luminous, or authors who publish in small fields that have limited markets. I'm not singling out your book, but African Studies is an example of an area where often gets relegated to small market, even if the topics are really important and no matter how important the scholarship is. And that has to do with the size of teaching and how infrequently those books are used in classroom settings. So as librarians know, budgets have been decimated. Librarians are being really thrifty and networking, and so that different libraries will build up certain collections. They're not buying everything that university presses publish. So the open access is a way for California and hopefully other presses in the future to continue publishing small market books exactly in the same way. It's a subvention model. So it goes through the same peer review process. It's the same production process. You can order a book if you want to have a printed copy of the book, you can have that, but the digital edition of the book is free. And because the digital edition of the book is free, we don't expect that we're actually going to see a return on the investment, so it requires authors to bring in subvention. So I think the thing that I always want to say to authors is I think bringing in subvention for book publishing often has, in many fields, has this really dirty, it's considered, just unseemly. I don't know what the word is. It's vanity publishing, right. But the thing that's really peculiar from a publisher's perspective is that is how art history has been published over, our art history books, sometimes the authors bring in $20,000 or $30,000. That's how science publishing works. I know that scientists have labs that have money, but our director, Alison Mudded, has been working really hard meeting with deans, and it seems like where there's a lot of energy and support for this is at the dean level. It's not the department level. Deans sit on money and have money to sort of distribute to this sort of thing. So I have a lot of authors who want to be in open access for political reasons too, because they want their book to be free. They want particularly scholars who work in like African studies, Latin American studies, South Asian studies, scholars who want people in Asia to be reading their book and know that there's an impediment to making those books available to libraries. So open access, there you go. It's available to anyone who wants it. I think there are other advantages too. Authors can have metrics about how their books are being used. The content gets indexed, so when people Google you, they can immediately see your book and access it. You can have color images, video, audio. There are more bells and whistles to be played with when you publish in this form. But I think vanity publishing is a high level of anxiety that people have. And the thing that I want people to keep in mind is subvention model has always been part of university press publishing. It's just that we're trying to push it into other fields where it has, once upon a time, there was a more significant course market that supported the publication of these books. Is that